Hey guys, this is part 2 of our bottom end rebuild series for the KTM Group 250 and 350 4-strokes. If you haven't gotten to this point, go check out our other videos, but this one's all about assembly, so let's go ahead and get into it. To get everything reassembled, everyone's parts list is going to look different from one another, and it depends what you find when you tear everything apart. Some common reasons you're in the bottom end are a connecting rod that's bad, whether it's the big end or the small end, or maybe you had transmission issues. But a few common things that are going to apply to almost everyone is the crank bearings. I would recommend replacing those anytime you're in here. And then we're also using new gaskets and seals along with O-rings and our circlips and E-clips. So other than that, it really depends what you've got going inside there. Now, if you haven't updated your oil pump gears to the metal ones, I recommend doing that. We also have the metal oil pump rotor, and that screen got updated as well. And then we had some clutch issues, so we're replacing those parts. And as you assemble, you want to make sure you have some fresh oil, assembly lube, thread locker. We've got gasket maker and some rubber gloves. Now, if you need any parts for your bike, we've got OEM and aftermarket parts available on our website. You can just click the link in the description below if you need to pick anything up. For tools, we've got the Tusk Moto Toolbox. That's going to cover most of our common hand tools. Specific things I want to point out that are not in there. We've got a torque wrench, a bearing and seal driver, a seal puller. I also have some snap ring pliers, a heavy duty clutch holding tool. Now right here I've got a dowel pin remover. This is not a must-have, but it's nice to have. You do need to have a flywheel puller. We also have a crankcase splitter. Now, if you're replacing your crank bearings, you need a race puller. You'll need a hot plate to go along with that, and then a 12.32 millimeter deep socket. Now, as we replace bearings, we're going to use a couple blocks of wood, a torch. I've got some contact cleaner, and then we're using a few different types of assembly lube today. So a couple more types are the spray-on type, and then we're also using some assembly grease. I also have my safety glasses, rubber gloves, and some rags. Now, if you need any special tools or this Moto Toolbox, we have them available on our website. Just click the link in the description below. All right, first thing we're doing, we need to replace the bearings on our crankcase halves, and we're replacing the crank bearings. So we need to remove these inner races off of our crank. I'm using soft jaws to clamp this web. So with that nice and snug in there, I need to heat up this puller. So I'm gonna put the hot plate on high. We're gonna let this heat up. And while that's heating up, there's a nut on the end of this crank. So you're gonna need a 32 millimeter 12-point socket or a wrench to loosen that up. And I'm gonna heat it up too. So this thing's good and hot. What we're gonna do is take the press. We've got that collared side, has the step in it that's gonna face down. We're just gonna let this sit on here for a second. And as soon as it heats that inner race up enough, it's gonna loosen it. So we have these shims underneath that inner race. It's real important to keep the same shims on each side if all you're doing is replacing the crank bearings. However, if you're rebuilding this, you're probably gonna have to order some additional shims and check the side-to-side clearance before you assemble everything. Now, before we go back together, I do wanna talk about these shims right here. So if you did install a new connecting rod onto the crank assembly, you're probably gonna need to make some adjustments with these shims. And what you can do is take the old inner race, and you can actually grind that inside diameter out, set the shims on, and then this should just set into place. And you're gonna put this inside the case halves. You'll do that on both sides, put it in the case halves, and then you can measure the side clearance of the crank and get the correct shims figured out. We're gonna talk more about that in a little bit, but if you're just replacing this inner race, what you're gonna wanna do is grease up these shims. We're talking just a very small amount. So I gave this a second to cool off. I'm gonna clean it up and make sure that I get this shim back in its original position before I do the other side. That way I don't mix them up. And then what I'm gonna do from here is install the new inner race the same way we removed the old one. And we've got our tool heating up, and we'll install that inner race. Now we've got this nut, I'm gonna apply some thread lock to it. I'm gonna torque that to 44.3 foot-pounds. So on this, you will need that 12-point deep socket, it's the 32. Then we're gonna do those same steps on the other side. The only difference is we don't have that retaining nut. And once you clean everything up, we're gonna put a little grease on the shims and install the inner race. You do have some side-to-side motion with these shims, so just get them centered up before you put the inner race all the way down. And confirm there's no movement in the shims once you have that inner race installed. Next thing we're gonna do is replace our bearings. If you're not replacing any, you don't have to do this step, but with this, we're gonna heat up the screws that hold the retaining plates since they have locking compound on them. Be careful not to melt that plastic ring right there. Now with the bearing retainers removed, I've got these wooden blocks because we have this dowel in here. I don't want that cutting into my mat. So I can set the case half on there while I press these bearings out, and to help these come out easier, I'm gonna use some MAP gas. I'm gonna heat this case up evenly. Then we'll use a socket to drive out the 3 transmission bearings. I am gonna leave the shift shaft bearings in since those don't see much wear. Then I'll use the old inner race for the crank bearing. And then once you let everything cool down, just make sure that you clean up the case half where the bearings were. You can see we have that oil passageway. I'm actually gonna spray a little contact cleaner through all this as well. Next, we're gonna do the same thing to the other case half. Just pay attention to the orientation of all the bearings. And we've got a little washer behind this one, so make sure you don't damage that. And then obviously this is just a bushing down here. Now with everything cleaned up, you want to take a look at that bearing surface on the case half and make sure there's not a bunch of grooves. If it looks like the bearing spun inside of there, you're gonna have to replace this piece. But ours is looking good, so we're ready to heat this up and install our bearings. Just keep in mind as you install them, you want to make sure that the bearings are cool. You can put them in a bag in the freezer, and that's gonna help everything drop into place. And then we're only pressing on the outer races, and that way it doesn't damage the bearing. Lightly grease the OD of your bearings. For the crank bearings, the stepped side will face up. Support the case with a block of wood and drive the bearings in. When the pitch changes, you know that the bearings are fully bottomed out. Now, if you heat the case enough, the bearings will just drop in. And on this bearing here, I'm applying just a little bit of grease to that washer. I'll set it down into place. And it's kind of hard to situate that on the block of wood, but really we just have this on the corner, and that way it's sitting flat. After that, we can install our bearing retainers. You want to make sure that taper on them is facing up. We're going to put medium strength thread lock on here, and we're going to torque them to 4.4 foot-pounds. After that, we're going to do the same thing to the other case half, and just pay attention to these crank bearings. Make sure that stepped side is facing the inside of the case. And once you have all the bearings installed on this side, you can install the bearing retainers. Again, that torque is going to be 4.4 foot-pounds and medium strength thread lock. And if you're using new bolts right here, they've already got the Loctite on them. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and install your seals. So with the seal on the right case half, what we're going to do is apply a little bit of grease to the lip, and then just a little bit on this outside diameter to help it slide into place. The open side, that's going to be facing up, and we're just going to press it in until it's flush with this case surface. You should be able to push it in by hand just like that, and then make sure it's flush all the way around. Okay, now on this case half, we also have our oil pressure relief valve. So on this cap, putting a new copper washer. Then we've got this ball. I've got just a thin film of grease on it. And then I'm putting the spring in. We're torquing that to 14.8 foot-pounds. Next, we have our counter shaft seal and shift shaft seal. We're going to do the same thing, apply grease to the lips and press these flush. Now for this balancer shaft, this is going to drive our water pump impeller, and there's a little collar right here. Our rebuild kit came with a new one, so I'm going to pull this off. Got two little O-rings I'm going to pull off as well. I'm going to grease up these new O-rings, slide them onto place. I'm going to slide this new collar on. Now for the clutch cover, we're going to replace the water pump seals and bearing. So we're going to pull them out. And underneath that, you want to pay attention to the orientation of the seals as you remove them. Okay, underneath that seal, we've got a snap ring right here. And then I could pry this seal out from this side, but what I'm actually going to do is flip this over. I'm going to apply some heat here, and I don't want to torch that seal without replacing it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this seal out of the way, get ready for the new one. So we've got that snap ring, pull that one out as well. And we'll use our seal puller. Again, paying attention to the orientation of the seal. And I can heat this up. Then from here, I'm going to flip it over. It might just fall right out. If not, you want to support that boss with a socket. And we'll drive the seal and the bearing out at the same time. So with that being hot, it just pressed right out. I'm just going to clean everything up and put it back together. All right, to go back together, we've got our new snap ring. It's always recommended to replace these anytime they're taken out. Just be careful not to overexpand it. And with the circlip, it's a good idea just to verify that it wasn't collapsed too far. You can make sure it's tight in the groove, which it is. It's all the way seated in there. So what we need to do now is install the new seals, and we're going to start with the seal that goes on the inside. The open side is going to be facing up, and we're going to apply grease to it just like everything else. And I'll set this in place, and I'm going to use my 22mm socket to press it down. Just make sure you are going even as you do this. Then for the bearing, I've got just a thin film of grease on the outside, and we did have this in the freezer, so it might drop in and it might not. That's going to help us out just a little bit. We'll go ahead and tap this in the rest of the way. So you can hear that bottom out. And then from here, flip it back over, and the open side of this sill, it's identical, and this is going to be facing out. And from here, you can wipe off any excess grease. Flip it back over. We're going to put this sill in. This open side is going to be facing up. And with this sill, you just need to make sure it's sitting below the groove for your snap ring. And we'll go ahead and install that snap ring. Make sure it's all the way seated into its location. Nice and tight. Now to measure the crankshaft end play, the first thing you want to do is grab the right crankcase half, and you're going to completely remove that screw or the bolt that holds the crank in place. And then we're going to set the case half in our engine stand. You could just set it on some blocks of wood. We'll slide the crank into place. Keep in mind the splines are going to be going into the right crankcase half. Then we'll set the left crankcase half in place. Make sure all the dowel pins are on there. And we're going to tap this together. Then we're installing all of our hardware. We're going to tighten everything in a crisscross pattern to 7.4 foot-pounds. So now that we have everything tightened down, we've let our crank cool down, just because those inner races, if they're hot, they're not going to move inside of the bearings. So with everything at room temperature, we can now measure the end clearance of the crankshaft. So with this end play, it's going to be that side-to-side clearance, and you want it to be right around 20 to 23 thousandths of an inch. So with that, we've got our dial indicator set up on our engine stand with that magnetic base. But again, if you don't have one of these, you can set that on your vise and then use the wooden blocks to hold everything secure. You want to make sure the engine doesn't move when you do this, otherwise it's going to mess up your reading. But what we need to do now, with everything positioned like this, we're just going to press straight up and straight down. And for us, we actually have about 40 thousandths of an inch. So we need to make adjustments. I need to take this back out and add some shims. So if you have too much play, you're going to add shims. If you have too little play, you want to remove shims. So we'll go ahead and do that and double check our measurement and then get everything ready for assembly. Use your digital calipers to measure the shims to make sure you get the right ones installed. And then for assembly, we're just going to pull all of the dowel pins out of the left crankcase half and install them to the right. Now to assemble the bottom end, first thing we're going to do is lube up these bearings. So I've got the spray-on assembly lube. You can use engine oil. This assembly grease is awesome because it dissolves easily in the oil. We're going to use that on the other side of the case half, but just for ease of use. And I'm applying just a little bit of assembly grease onto that inner race. And then we're going to slide the crank into position, and keep in mind the splines, they're going to be in this right side case half. I'm going to tip this up just a little bit in our engine stand. But having the case mostly vertical right now, that's going to help us install these transmission shafts. So I'm going to get those all lubed up. All right, now we're going to install these transmission shafts as an assembly. The splines for the clutch, they're going into that right case half, and then we've got that groove on the counter shaft that's going into the right. You can see we have the washer and this freewheeling gear, all that stuff. It tends to slide off the shaft as you go together. So that's why I have this rubber band, and I'm just gonna remove that once I have these installed. But that way I know nothing drops. So we're in, rubber band is trapped, so I'm just gonna cut that. I'm gonna pull out on the shaft just enough to where that can come out. There we have it. And just make sure both of those shafts are fully seated, and we're gonna lay the engine flat. So this point right here, I still have pretty good access to everywhere on this case half. I wanna make sure all the oil is off the sealing surface. So you can see I got a ton up in here. I'm gonna wipe that down. And I'm gonna use some contact cleaner on this rag. Make sure it's squeaky clean. Now for the shift forks, we've got them all lubed up. I'm going to install this one on the main shaft first. So this one is the one with the smaller inside diameter. I'm gonna leave that in just a little bit so I can eventually get the shift drum in place. All right, now for these other two. You're gonna have to look right next to the pin. So this one on the bottom, you can see it's completely flat underneath the pin. This one on top has just a little step right here by that boss where it rides on that dowel. That's gonna be the higher shift fork. So we'll start with the bottom. And we'll go to the top. Now for the shift drum, we've got this open side that's gonna be facing out. All these grooves, you want facing the shift forks. Then from here we can line up our shift forks one at a time. You might have to rotate the transmission a little bit to get everything to slide where it needs to be. And then just make sure the shift forks, those pins, they need to be in the right groove. So this one's gonna be in the lowest groove, this one's gonna be in the highest, and then the fork on the main shaft, that's gonna be in the middle. Once you've done that, you wanna slide your dowel pins in and make sure that everything stays lined up. There we have it. And if you just want to double check everything, you can rotate that shift drum and make sure everything's working good. And then right on top of this transmission shaft, we've got the inner race for that output shaft bearing. Set that in place. All right, now for the left crankcase half, we're gonna lube up all these bearings. And again, this is where I'm using the grease. And the reason for that is I don't want oil dripping down on my sealing surface. I wanna make sure everything seals good. I just wanna do this once. So this is the easiest way to get it done. And then this main shaft bearing, you're gonna have to pack it in just a little bit to force it down in there. Rotate that over, work it around. Then with that greased up, I'm gonna make sure this sealing surface is squeaky clean as well. You can see I got a little bit of grease right here. Wipe that off. Okay, for the sealant, you don't want to overdo it, otherwise it's going to smush everywhere. It really just takes a thin film all the way around, and ideally the case is in good condition, and this stuff is just taking up any imperfections and preventing that oil from leaking out. So with it, I like to apply it with just a finger and dab it on. Some people will use an acid brush. The only reason I don't like using those is sometimes they leave bristles behind. I don't want to deal with it. And then right by that oil passageway, just make sure you have a really thin amount. You don't want it squishing in there, blocking anything. All right, next up, we're gonna make sure we have all our dowel pins in place. So it's looking like they are all there. So now we can set the case half down. Make sure you have your transmission shafts, crank bearing, and all your dowels lined up. And then you can use your rubber mallet just to gently tap this into place. And then with the case all the way seated, Going to install all of the bolts, and just pay attention. So these bolts up here, that's about how far you want them sticking out. And they should look even all the way across. If you get the wrong bolt in the wrong spot, it's gonna look a lot different. So that's just an easy way to keep track of everything. And we're gonna tighten those in a crisscross pattern and torque them to 7.4 foot-pounds. Now on the right side of the case, we need to install our snap ring. Make sure it's fully seated, and you want the sharp edge facing out. And we've got this collar right here. I'm gonna put a little grease on that and slide it into place. Okay, next I'm gonna rotate the crank. I'm gonna make sure it's at top dead center, and you're gonna see the groove through that hole, and you're gonna lock it in place with that screw. Now for the shift shaft, there's a little tab at the bottom of the case. That spring is gonna sit on there. We've got the washer, and we've got a little lube on there and where it rides in those bearings. We'll go ahead and install that. Keep in mind you've got that seal on the other side. We're gonna gently push it through. We've got this star wheel or drum locator, and you'll notice that these are different sizes for the locators, so make sure you get them lined up, and you're gonna have to push back on this to set it in place. And then we're gonna install the center bolt with a little bit of medium strength thread locker, and we'll torque it to 7.4 foot-pounds. All right, next up we have our stopper arm. So we've got the collar sitting in there, we've got the spring on it, it's hooked on to the arm, and I've got some medium strength thread lock on there. I'm gonna start by threading this in place. We're gonna leave it loose enough that we can rotate this back. So I'm gonna have to back this off just a hair. So from here, I'm gonna tension this up. That's gonna have to sit in one of the grooves, and we need to make sure that this piece sits on the collar. So I'm gonna go till it just lightly snugs up, then I'm gonna back it off a hair, and then I wanna make sure this actually drops into place. It's right there, that just sat on the collar. I can pull this washer back and actually see that it's everything centered up. So even if I back the bolt off a little bit now, this can't move around, so we know we're on there. We're gonna tighten that to 4.4 foot-pounds. All right, next thing we're gonna do is assemble the force pump. So I'm gonna lube these parts up. Now for the shaft, we're gonna install this from the generator side, and the smaller diameter end with the 2 holes in it, that's gonna be facing us. So I'm just gonna slide that to about right there. You wanna make sure you have plenty of lube on these parts. Now I do wanna point out that we have the dots, and we're gonna have those facing out. So we'll slide that into place. So then we have this little pin. We'll put that in the hole that's furthest back. And then I'm gonna rotate this into place. And it's gonna go in the center rotor. After that, we have our cover, putting a little bit of grease on there, or oil. And then this has an arrow, so you wanna make sure that's facing up. Then we're gonna apply Loctite to the 2 bolts, and we're gonna torque them to 4.4 foot-pounds. Then we have the longer pin that goes through the oil pump shaft. Then we have our updated oil pump gear. Make sure that is sitting over the pin. And then from the other side, I'm gonna push on the shaft. And that's gonna allow or give me enough room to install the washer. And with our clips, the sharp edges are gonna be facing out. Next we have the updated idler gear for the oil pump. So I've got that washer. Gonna make sure that we have plenty of lube on here. And that flange is gonna be facing in. I've got this washer on the outside, then the snap ring with the sharp edge facing out. Okay, next we're gonna do the balancer shaft and timing chain. So with this, I'm gonna make sure I've got everything lubed up. Now for the cam chain, we're using a new one. If you are using the old one, make sure you install it in the same orientation you took it off. We're gonna make sure this is lubed up. I'm gonna pull the balancer shaft out, slide this cam chain down, work it onto the shaft, onto that lower sprocket, put that back in place. And we're gonna install all of the guides. So we're gonna start by setting this lower guide in place. Apply some thread locker to the bolt. Thread that in. I'm gonna pull that cam chain tight. I've got this rear guide, I'm gonna slide down in here. Same thing with this bolt. Apply a little bit of thread locker. And we're gonna tighten both of these bolts to 7.4 foot-pounds. Then we've got our tensioning rail. And with that, just make sure that you have the pin lined up with the rail. Same thing with the bolt, little thread locker. We'll torque that down to 11.1 foot-pounds. Now for the primary drive gear, we've got one of these internal splines that is double wide. So that's gonna line up with our crank right there. And we also need to time this gear with our balancer. So there's the one dot that's gonna sit in between those two on the teeth. So I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this so it's pretty close to where it needs to be. And then line everything up. We can now install the nut. I'm gonna put some Loctite or thread locker on there. And I'm gonna torque it to 88.5 foot-pounds. Keep in mind this is reverse thread. I'm just gonna wipe off any excess thread locker. Now for the clutch, I'm gonna install my collar. Make sure it's lubed up. I've got the needle bearings, basket, then we've got a washer, the hub, then we have this locking tab washer. And we're gonna install the nut. We'll apply some thread locker to it and torque this to 73.8 foot-pounds. We're gonna hold the basket with our heavy-duty clutch holding tool. Okay, and then for this lock washer, I'm just bending one of these tabs down. I've got that sitting all the way against the nut. This one that doesn't quite line up even, just gonna leave that one alone. Now for the clutch, we have these 6 pins we're putting in place. And just like anything else, make sure everything's lubed up as you go together. Now for the steels, there's a few things I wanna point out. So whether you have an aftermarket or the OEM plates, you're gonna have 2 thinner plates and 6 thicker plates. So these thinner ones are gonna be right around 1 millimeter thick each. So these thinner plates, that's gonna be the innermost plate and the outermost plate. And if you are
using your factory plates. The one with the S, that's gonna be the innermost plate. But if you're going aftermarket, it won't matter which is which. And then the rest of these are gonna be right around 1.4 millimeters. So I'm gonna start with the thinner plate. I have just a little bit of oil on this. And then I wanna point out that all these stills, they're gonna have a slightly rounded edge and one slightly sharper edge. So it doesn't matter which way it goes on, just make sure that you put all of them on in the same orientation. So I've got the slightly sharper edge facing out. Then for the friction discs, I've already dipped these in some fresh oil. Now we're just gonna rotate between the steels and the friction. And last we have that thinner steel. Now I'm gonna make sure we have some lube on this throwout bearing. Put that right in the center. Gonna make sure that I have some oil on the pressure plate. Now I can go ahead and set this in place. Next we have a washer that goes on our pressure plate. Make sure you have the top marking facing out. And we've got our Belleville washer on top of that and our spring retainer. We've got the 1, 2, 3 marks. We're gonna start with number 1, especially since we have brand new clutch plates in here. But if you were reusing some old ones, you can return it to the original setting. So all 6 bolts going in position 1. You can start those with the drill, but I'm just gonna finish them off with my torque wrench. We're gonna go to 4.4 foot-pounds. All right, now we just need to make sure that our clutch setup is done correctly. So we're in position 1, and I can see this Belleville washer, it's actually indented a little bit, but we're gonna double check that. So I've got a straight edge. This is gonna sit right against that spring retainer. And then right in the middle of this, I'm gonna take a measurement, and I'm just gonna use a feeler gauge to do that. So the spec is no clearance at all the way up to 0.10 millimeters. We've got way more clearance than that. If you didn't have enough tension on there, you'd be able to rock the straight edge just a little bit from side to side, and you could press on one corner and use the feeler gauge on the opposite end. So I'm gonna try position number 2 right now. Take some of that preload off. So we're still too concave in the middle. So I'm gonna go to position number 3. So right here I have my smallest feeler gauge. This is the 0.03 millimeter gauge. Doesn't fit in anywhere. We're straight across, so we're gonna leave it in position 3. Next, we're gonna install our clutch cover gasket. We've got those 3 locating pins, make sure they're in place. We already made sure that we don't have any oil on the sealing surfaces. So from here, we can go ahead and slide our cover into place. And from here, I'm just gonna wipe off any excess grease. Next, we've got the water pump impeller. So I'll slide the first piece on. The second piece is gonna line up with the shaft. And then the grooves are gonna sit down into the impeller. I'm just gonna rotate it so it lines up. There we go. It's all the way settled in. And we'll tighten that nut to 4.4 foot-pounds. After that, we have our gasket. Put that into place. And then from here, if you are replacing this gasket on the clutch cover, now's a good time to do it. Then from here, we're gonna set the outer clutch cover in place, and we can start setting our bolts into place. And then in this top mounting location, this is gonna be one with a copper washer. It's the 1-inch bolt or 25mm bolt. Then from here, we're gonna tighten all of these down in a crisscross pattern. We'll do it in a couple steps, and the final torque will be 7.4 foot-pounds. We have to do this before we install the water pump cover to make sure we have access to that bolt. Now for the water pump cover, we've got the 2 pins in their locations. Set the cover in place. We've got the 2 longer bolts at the front, the 2 25mm bolts. One with the copper washer is going to be at the bottom, and then without it will be at the top. And again, we'll tighten those to 7.4 foot-pounds. And we've got our new Tusk oil filler cap, adding a little bit of bling on here. So next up, we have our suction pump. I'm gonna lube all these parts up, and for this pin, I have a little bit of assembly grease on it. That's gonna help hold it in place. Now for the rotors, these both have the dot on them, and this can only go on one way. So for these, the dot is gonna be facing in towards the engine. The manual will tell you the rounded side of the rotor towards the engine case. So I'm gonna put that internal rotor on first. Make sure it's bottomed out all the way. That way we know the pin is in the correct location. Then the external. Lube up the O-ring, set it in place. Now we're gonna install our cover, and we're using new screws on this. They already have Loctite applied to them. Next, you're gonna wanna lube up the bearing on this freewheeling gear, along with that outer surface. Set that in place. And we've got our intermediate gear, lube that up as well. And we've got our bolt and washer for that intermediate gear. Little thread locker. We'll torque it to 7.4 foot-pounds. Then for the flywheel, you just want to make sure the Woodruff key is in place. I'm going to make sure there's no oil on this taper. Clean it off all the way. I'm also going to make sure the taper is clean on my flywheel. And then on that one-way bearing, I do have some assembly lube on there. And all we need to do now is slide the flywheel in place, and we have that groove that we need to line up with the Woodruff key. And to help everything go together, just spinning that freewheeling gear to get that one-way clutch to sit all the way on. And then for the mounting bolt, we've got oil on it. We're going to torque it to 51.6 foot-pounds. After that, we've got our torque limiting gear. Move that up where it rides. Set it in place. And then I'm going to put a little grease on this O-ring for the starter, install it, and torque those bolts to 7.4 foot-pounds.
Now for the stator, we've seen these bolts back off in the past, so we want to remove them, clean the threads, and apply some thread locker to help prevent issues.
Now with everything cleaned up, we can set our stator back into place. Got those wires going up towards the top, and we have this guide for the wires.
Now we can install the bolts and torque them to 4.4 foot-pounds.
And if you have that grommet out, it's a good idea to apply just a little bit of silicone sealant down in here. Got a little too much, I'm gonna have to wipe some of that out. Should just take a thin film. And then if there was any excess, you could wipe that out. And then as you install the cover, it's not a bad idea to apply just a little bit of silicone sealant on the corners of that grommet. And from here, we're gonna put our gasket on the engine case half. Make sure those 2 pins are in place. Then we're gonna set the cover in place and be really careful because the flywheel is gonna wanna suck this in, so make sure your fingers are not between the sealing surfaces. And once you make sure the gasket's still in the right spot, you can install all of the bolts. We're gonna torque those down in a crisscross pattern. You guessed it, 7.4 foot-pounds. Next, we're gonna install our drain plug. We're torquing that to 14.8 foot-pounds. We also have a new crush washer on there. And then we've got a plug on bottom, making sure I've got some oil on that O-ring. Gonna thread that into place. This one gets torqued to 11.1 foot-pounds. I'm gonna do that at the same time as my oil screen cap. So with this, we have our new oil screen, putting some O-rings on there. Now to get the screen lined up, I'm using a T-handle to help guide it in position. Pop that into place. And for the cap, I've got some lube on the O-ring. And we'll torque this and that bottom drain bolt to 11.1 foot-pounds. Now for the oil filter, we've let that soak in some oil. We'll go ahead and set that into place. Obviously the rubber grommet is going in. We've got some oil on the cap O-ring. And torque these to 7.4 foot-pounds. And then back at the transmission output shaft, we've got this O-ring going on. Grease that up, slide that on, and we've got this collar. I'm gonna grease that up as well and slide it into place. Now for the gear position sensor, we're gonna set that in place. We've got the cover. And we're using new screws with thread locker already on them. If you're using the old ones, make sure you get some on there. We're gonna torque them to 3.7 foot-pounds. Then from here, make sure you have some oil or assembly lube on your push rod and slide it into place.
All right, so now you've got your bottom back together. That does it for this video. Follow us over to the next video for the top end assembly. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comments. And if you need any parts, you can find those on our website. Click the link in the description below. If you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.